Hey everyone, tonight we journey into the shadows of the most sacred place in the galaxy. We uncover the dark truth about the Jedi Temple's foundation, a secret so profound that it has shaped 25,000 years of galactic history. This is the story of how the greatest beacon of light in the galaxy was built upon something far more ancient and terrifying than anyone dared imagine. So before we descend into these forbidden depths together, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy the deep mysteries we explore here. I noticed that about 79% of you watching are not yet subscribed, and your subscription truly helps this channel grow and bring you more of these hidden Star Wars stories that deserve to be told. Now I'm genuinely curious. Drop a comment and let me know where in the galaxy you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. There's something magical about knowing we're all gathered here from different corners of Earth, united by our love for that galaxy far, far away. Dim the lights, get comfortable under your blankets, and let's begin this journey into the shadows together. Long ago, in the deepest archives of the Jedi Temple, there lived whispers of something that should never have been built upon. Ancient chroniclers spoke in hushed tones of the day when the temple's foundation stones were laid, and how the Force itself seemed to recoil from what lay beneath. They tell of Jedi Masters who would wake screaming from dreams of darkness rising from below, of younglings who refused to meditate in certain chambers because the shadows felt wrong, and of a secret so terrible that it was buried beneath 25 millennia of carefully constructed lies. But tonight, we shall uncover what the Jedi Council never wanted you to know. In the time before the Republic, when Coruscant was still young, and the surface bore scars of wars fought by beings whose names are lost to history, something crashed into the planet's crust with the force of a dying star. The impact sent shockwaves through the Force itself, creating ripples that would be felt across the galaxy for ages yet to come. What fell from the heavens that day was not a meteorite, not a ship, but something far more significant. Something that had fled across the void between galaxies, carrying with it the desperate hope of a dying civilization and the terrible knowledge of what pursued them. The indigenous peoples of ancient Coruscant felt it immediately. The very ground beneath their feet hummed with an energy that was neither light nor dark, but something older than both. They built their first temples over the impact site, drawn by an compulsion they could not understand. Generation after generation, civilization after civilization would rise and fall on this exact spot, each one building upon the ruins of the last, each one adding their own layer to what would eventually become the most sacred ground in the galaxy. The Sith found it during their golden age of expansion. They recognized immediately what lay beneath the accumulated debris of millennia, and they built their own temple there. A massive pyramid of dark stone that channeled the ancient energies into rituals of unimaginable power. For thousands of years, Sith Lords made pilgrimage to this site, performing ceremonies that reached deep into the planet's core and touched something that should have been left undisturbed. But the Sith Temple fell, as all things must, lost to the shifting tides of galactic war and the passage of time. The jungle grew over its ruins, and for centuries the site lay apparently abandoned, though local wildlife gave it a wide berth, sensing something in the soil that spoke of ancient hunger and patient watching. When the Jedi came to Coruscant to build their great temple, they chose this location for reasons they believed were their own. The Force was strong here, stronger than anywhere else on the planet. It called to them with promises of wisdom and power, whispering that this was where they belonged, where they could build something magnificent that would endure for all time. They never questioned why the Force felt so strong in this particular place. They never wondered what lay beneath the foundations they were digging. They never asked themselves why their dreams, in the weeks following the temple's construction, were filled with visions of something vast and patient stirring in the depths below. But there was one among them who knew, one who had seen the ancient records and understood what they were truly building upon. This Jedi Master stood in the shadows during the dedication ceremony, watching his fellow Jedi celebrate their magnificent achievement, knowing that they had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. And in the depths beneath their feet, something that had waited for 100,000 years finally began to smile. What was it that lay beneath the Jedi Temple? What had drawn every Force-sensitive civilization to build upon this cursed ground? And why, in the final days of the Republic, did the darkness finally begin to stir? In the waning days of the Republic, when the Clone Wars raged across 1,000 worlds and the galaxy trembled on the edge of an abyss it could not yet see, there lived a young archivist named Kira Thane in the great Jedi Temple on Coruscant. The temple rose like a prayer, made manifest from the endless cityscape, its 5 spires reaching toward stars that seemed to grow dimmer with each passing night. Kira was not a Jedi, though the Force flowed through her veins like starlight through crystal. She was something rarer and perhaps more dangerous. A keeper of forbidden knowledge, one of the few trusted with access to the restricted archives where the Order kept its darkest secrets. Her family had served the temple for 7 generations, each one taking up the sacred duty of preserving knowledge too dangerous for common minds to comprehend. But Kira was different from her ancestors. While they had been content to catalog and preserve, she yearned to understand. While they had accepted the boundaries set by the Jedi Council, she found herself drawn inexorably toward the spaces between the official histories, the gaps where important truths had been carefully excised from the record. The temple itself seemed to whisper to her in ways it never had to others. In the deep hours of the night, when she worked alone among the ancient holocrons and crumbling manuscripts, she would sometimes hear voices speaking in languages that predated the Republic by thousands of years. The other archivists dismissed these as acoustic echoes from the temple's vast ventilation systems, but Kira knew better. The voices came from below, from spaces that did not appear on any architectural diagram she had ever seen. Her workspace occupied a small chamber on the temple's 73rd level, surrounded by repositories that contained the accumulated wisdom of 25,000 years of Jedi history. The walls were lined with holocrons, whose blue glow provided the only illumination she needed, their soft light casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Ancient Jedi texts filled shelf after shelf, their pages yellow with age and brittle as autumn leaves, while sealed cases held artifacts so dangerous that even Jedi Masters required special permission to examine them. It was here, in this sanctuary of forbidden knowledge, that Kira first discovered the discrepancies that would change her life forever. The official histories all agreed that the Jedi Temple had been built on virgin ground, chosen for its natural strength in the Force and its strategic position at the heart of what would become the galactic capital. But as Kira delved deeper into the archives, she began to find references that didn't match the accepted narrative. Ancient survey reports mentioned pre-existing structures that had to be cleared before construction could begin. Archaeological notes described artifacts recovered from beneath the foundation stones, artifacts that bore no resemblance to any known Jedi or Republic designs. Most disturbing of all were the personal journals of the temple's original architects, sealed away in the deepest vaults and marked with warnings that made even hardened Jedi Masters think twice before breaking their seals. These chronicles spoke of strange dreams that plagued the construction crews, of workers who claimed to hear machinery running in empty foundation pits, and of a persistent feeling that something vast and ancient was watching them from below. Kira's investigations might have remained merely academic curiosity, were it not for the dreams that began to visit her 3 months before the end of the Clone Wars. Night after night, she found herself walking through chambers that existed nowhere in the temple's known structure, vast spaces carved from living rock and filled with technology that hummed with purposes she could not fathom. In these visions, she descended ever deeper into the planet's crust, following passages that seemed to extend toward Coruscant's very core. The dreams always ended the same way. she would find herself standing before an enormous chamber whose walls stretched beyond the reach of sight, and in the center of this impossible space would be something that defied description. Not a machine, exactly, and not alive in any way she understood, but something that partook of both natures and transcended them both. It would turn its attention toward her in these moments, this ancient presence that had been waiting beneath the temple for longer than human civilization had existed, and she would wake with the absolute certainty that it had been trying to tell her something vitally important. The Force visions grew stronger with each passing night. She began to see flashes of the temple's construction, watching as the Jedi unknowingly built their monument to the light directly over chambers that had been sealed for reasons lost to history. She witnessed ceremonies performed by beings who were neither Jedi nor Sith, rituals that seemed designed to appease something vast and hungry that dwelt in the planetary depths. And always threading through these visions like a river of starlight was the growing certainty that she had been chosen to uncover truths that others had died to protect. Her family legacy added weight to these revelations. Among her grandmother's papers, carefully preserved in the family archives, Kira discovered references to her ancestor Jedi Thane, who had served as a historical consultant during the temple's original construction. His notes, written in the careful script of a professional chronicler, contained observations that had been systematically removed from all official records. Jedi had noted the presence of pre-existing chambers beneath the construction site, spaces that seemed to extend deep into Coruscant's crust, in defiance of all geological surveys. He had catalogued artifacts recovered from these depths, objects whose technology was so advanced that even the Republic's greatest scientists could not determine their purpose or origin. Most significantly, he had documented the dreams and visions experienced by Force-sensitive members of the construction crew, accounts that painted a picture of something ancient and patient-stirring to awareness as the temple took shape above it. The final entry in Jedi's chronicle was dated just 3 days before the temple's dedication ceremony, and it contained only a single line written in handwriting that betrayed deep fear. "It knows we are here, and it is pleased." The discovery that would shatter Kira's understanding of everything she believed came on a night when Coruscant's artificial aurora painted the sky in shades of amber and crimson. She had been working late in the restricted archives, following a lead from Jedi's notes about construction records that had been sealed by direct order of the Jedi Council. The holocron she sought was listed in the catalog, but had never been properly indexed, as if someone had wanted it to remain lost among the countless other records. When she finally located it, hidden behind a false wall in one of the archive's oldest sections, the holocron felt different in her hands. Where most Jedi holocrons emanated the familiar warmth of the light side, this one felt neutral, almost clinical in its Force signature. As the crystal pyramid activated and began to project its contents, Kira realized she was looking at something that predated the Republic by millennia. The hologram showed architectural surveys of the temple construction site, but these were unlike any she had seen in the official records. Instead of the empty bedrock that Jedi historians claimed had been found, the surveys revealed an intricate network of chambers and passages that extended deep into Coruscant's crust. The structures were clearly artificial, built with a precision that surpassed even modern galactic engineering standards, yet their style matched nothing in the historical databases. More disturbing still were the notations made by the original survey team. They described technology still functioning in these buried chambers, machinery that had been running continuously for an unknown period of time. Energy readings indicated power sources that made the temple's own fusion reactors look primitive by comparison. Most unsettling of all, Force-sensitive members of the survey team reported feeling watched whenever they entered the deeper chambers, as if something vast and intelligent was aware of their presence. Kira's hands trembled as she scrolled through the survey data. According to these records, The Jedi Council had not simply built over ancient ruins, they had constructed their temple as a cap over something that was still active, still functioning, still very much alive in ways that defied conventional understanding. The temple's unusual strength in the Force was not due to its sanctity or the accumulated meditation of countless Jedi over the centuries. It was because something immensely powerful lay directly beneath their feet, something that had been there long before the first Jedi ever set foot on Coruscant. The next set of records in the holocron dealt with the artifacts that had been recovered during the temple's construction. Kira had expected to see the usual archaeological finds from any major excavation project, but what she found instead defied categorization. The items photographed and catalogued looked like no technology she had ever seen, neither Republic, Imperial, Sith, nor Jedi in origin. They seemed to be fashioned from materials that bent light in impossible ways, creating surfaces that appeared solid from one angle and translucent from another. Most of the artifacts had been studied extensively before being sealed away in the temple's deepest vaults. The research notes made for disturbing reading. Several items had demonstrated the ability to interface directly with Force-sensitive beings, downloading information into their minds without any physical connection. Others had projected holographic displays showing star charts of regions beyond the known galaxy, as if mapping territories that lay far beyond the galactic rim. One artifact, a crystalline structure about the size of a human torso, had apparently contained a form of artificial intelligence that claimed to have been waiting for 25 million years for someone to activate it. The researchers had eventually stopped their investigations when several team members began experiencing shared nightmares about something approaching from the darkness between galaxies. The final report, signed by a Jedi Master, whose name had been redacted from all copies, recommended that all artifacts be sealed permanently, and that all records of the excavation be classified at the highest levels of temple security. But it was the personal journal entries that accompanied the official reports that truly shook Kira to her core. The archaeologists and Force users who had worked on the excavation had documented their experiences in detail, and their accounts painted a picture of mounting psychological pressure as they delved deeper into the buried chambers. They described dreams that felt more real than waking life, visions of galactic civilization being guided by unseen hands, and a growing certainty that their excavation was part of some vast plan that had been unfolding for eons. One journal entry, written by a Jedi archaeologist named Master Vennik Sar, described an encounter in the deepest chambers that had haunted him for the rest of his life. He had been examining what appeared to be a control room when the ancient machinery suddenly activated around him. Holographic displays had shown him images of galactic history that contradicted everything the Jedi taught about the rise of civilization. According to these displays, every major development in galactic society had been subtly guided by an intelligence that originated from beyond their galaxy, an intelligence that had been preparing for something that was still to come. The journal entries grew increasingly frantic as the excavation continued. Team members reported feeling as though their thoughts were not entirely their own, as if something was gently guiding their investigations along predetermined paths. Several archaeologists noted that they seemed to be finding exactly what they were looking for, even when they hadn't been consciously looking for anything specific. The ancient chambers appeared to be revealing their secrets in a deliberate sequence, as if something wanted the excavation team to understand particular truths in a particular order. The final entry in Master Sar's journal was dated just 1 week before the temple's official dedication. By then he was convinced that the excavation had been manipulated from the beginning, that the Jedi Council's decision to build the temple on that specific site had not been their own choice at all. Something in the buried chambers had been influencing Force-sensitive beings for millennia, drawing them to this location and encouraging them to build ever grander structures over its resting place. His last words were a warning that would prove prophetic in ways he could never have imagined. He wrote that the intelligence beneath the temple was patient beyond mortal understanding, that it had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself fully, and that the construction of the Jedi Temple was not the end of its plans, but merely the beginning of their final phase. As Kira read these words in the silence of the restricted archives, she felt the truth settle over her like a shroud. The dreams that had been plaguing her, the visions of ancient chambers and incomprehensible machinery, were not random manifestations of her Force sensitivity. They were invitations. Something beneath the temple had been calling to her, just as it had called to the archaeologist decades earlier, just as it had called to every Force-sensitive being who had ever set foot on this sacred ground. She was being recruited for a purpose that spanned geological ages, and refusing the call was no longer an option. The knowledge she had uncovered came with an obligation she was only beginning to understand. Whatever lay beneath the Jedi Temple had chosen her to be its herald, and the fate of the galaxy might well depend on whether she had the courage to answer its ancient summons. 3 nights passed before Kira found the courage to seek out the hidden passages that Jorik's notes had described. During those sleepless hours, she wrestled with the implications of what she had discovered, knowing that once she took the next step, there would be no returning to the comfortable ignorance that had protected her family for 7 generations. The weight of inherited secrets pressed down upon her like the crushing depths of Coruscant's lower levels, where sunlight never penetrated and the city's foundations disappeared into darkness. The entrance she sought was located in the temple's sub-basement archives, behind a maintenance panel that looked identical to hundreds of others scattered throughout the building's lower levels. According to Jorik's carefully encrypted notes, the panel could be opened only by someone with Force sensitivity, responding to a specific pattern of mental commands rather than any physical key. As Kira placed her palm against the seemingly solid durasteel, she felt the metal warm beneath her touch, and with a whisper of displaced air, the panel slid aside to reveal a narrow passage that descended into the planet's crust. The air that flowed up from the hidden depths carried scents that had no place in the sanitized environment of the Jedi Temple. She detected traces of ozone and copper, the metallic tang of advanced circuitry, and something else that her mind struggled to categorize. It was organic yet artificial, ancient yet somehow timeless, like the smell of rain on stone that had been waiting for centuries to be wet again. Her descent began with a narrow stairway carved from the living rock of Coruscant's bedrock. The walls bore no markings that she could identify, yet their surface had been polished to a mirror smoothness that reflected her glow rod's light in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. As she moved deeper, the oppressive weight of the city above became palpable, millions of tons of construction and civilization pressing down through layers of geological time. The stairway ended at a circular platform, surrounded by what appeared to be an ancient lift system. The technology was unlike anything in her experience, consisting of crystalline formations that hummed with barely contained energy. When she stepped onto the platform, it responded to her presence without any conscious command on her part, beginning a smooth descent that accelerated beyond what should have been safe for organic passengers. Yet somehow she felt no discomfort, as if the lift system itself was compensating for the laws of physics in ways that defied rational explanation. As the lift descended, Kira began to notice that the walls of the shaft were not simply carved rock. Embedded in the stone were structures that looked almost like circuitry, branching patterns of some crystalline material that pulsed with faint bioluminescent light. The patterns grew more complex as she went deeper, evolving from simple geometric forms into intricate networks that resembled neural pathways more than any kind of technology she understood. The descent continued for what felt like hours, though her chronometer indicated that only 30 minutes had passed. Time itself seemed to behave differently in this place, stretching and compressing in ways that made linear measurement meaningless. She found herself thinking of the deep ocean trenches on aquatic worlds, where pressure and darkness created environments so alien that they might as well have been on different planets entirely. When the lift finally came to rest, Kira stepped out into a corridor that challenged her understanding of ancient architecture. The passage was enormous, easily large enough to accommodate a gunship, yet it gave the impression of intimate scale through some trick of proportion that her mind could not quite grasp. The walls curved upward into shadows that her light could not penetrate, creating the sense of walking through the ribcage of some impossibly vast creature. The corridor stretched ahead for hundreds of meters, its surface marked by alcoves that contained objects she dared not examine too closely. Some appeared to be technological in nature, banks of controls and displays that still showed active readouts after an unknown span of time. Others looked almost biological, organic structures that pulsed with rhythms that reminded her uncomfortably of heartbeats. All of them seemed to track her movement as she passed, though she could detect no obvious sensory apparatus that would enable such awareness. Her footsteps echoed strangely in the vast space, the sound seeming to travel much farther than the corridor's visible dimensions would suggest. Sometimes she heard what sounded like responses to her footfalls, as if something else was walking parallel to her path through spaces she could not see. When she paused to listen, the echoes continued for several seconds before fading into silence that felt expectant rather than empty. The corridor branched repeatedly as she progressed deeper into the complex. Each intersection offered multiple paths that seemed to extend infinitely into the darkness, yet somehow she never hesitated about which direction to take. Something was guiding her choices, providing navigation through intuition rather than conscious decision-making. She found herself following routes that felt correct in ways she could not articulate, as if she were remembering a path she had traveled many times before. The architecture around her began to change as she moved deeper into the complex. The purely functional corridors gave way to spaces that served ceremonial or ritualistic purposes. She passed through chambers whose walls were covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them, and rooms containing what appeared to be meditation or contemplation areas designed for beings much larger than humans. One chamber contained a series of raised platforms, arranged in concentric circles around a central focal point. As Kira approached the center, the platforms began to glow with soft phosphorescent light, revealing inscriptions in a script that predated any known galactic language. Yet somehow she could understand fragments of the meaning, concepts that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to something deeper in her consciousness. The inscriptions spoke of preparation and waiting, of plans that spanned eons and purposes that transcended individual civilizations. They described a great work that required the cooperation of countless generations, each adding their piece to a pattern so vast that no single mind could comprehend its full scope. Most disturbing of all, they spoke of her by name, or at least by the role she was destined to play in events that were still unfolding. As she stood in that ancient chamber, surrounded by writings that had been waiting for her specifically to read them, Kira finally understood that her journey into these depths was not exploration, but homecoming. She was not discovering secrets so much as reclaiming a heritage that had been hidden from her until she was ready to accept its implications. The intelligence that dwelt in these buried spaces had been preparing for her arrival, just as it had prepared for the arrival of her ancestors and would prepare for the arrival of her descendants. The realization should have been terrifying, yet instead she felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in her life, the dreams and visions that had plagued her made sense. She was exactly where she belonged, walking paths that had been planned for her before she was born, fulfilling a destiny that was both cosmic in scope and intimately personal. The darkness ahead no longer seemed threatening but welcoming, like the embrace of a parent she had never known but always missed. Whatever secrets lay deeper in these ancient chambers, whatever truths had been hidden beneath the Jedi Temple for 25,000 years, she would face them with the knowledge that she had been chosen specifically for this purpose. Her real journey was only just beginning. The first chamber Kira entered defied every assumption she had ever held about ancient architecture and the limits of pre-Republic civilization. The space was vast enough to house a capital ship, its ceiling disappearing into shadows that seemed to absorb her glow rod's illumination rather than simply reflecting it. The walls curved in impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly, surfaces that appeared flat from one angle and deeply concave from another, as if the chamber existed in more dimensions than her human perception could process. At the chamber's center stood what could only be described as an altar, though it bore no resemblance to any religious structure in the galactic databases. The platform was carved from a single piece of black stone that seemed to drink in light, its surface covered with channels and depressions that formed patterns too complex for random chance. When Kira approached within 10 meters, the altar began to emit a low harmonic resonance that she felt in her bones rather than heard with her ears. The sound triggered something in the chamber's walls. Sections that had appeared to be solid stone suddenly became transparent, revealing alcoves containing objects that predated the Republic by countless millennia. Some were clearly technological devices, though their purpose remained incomprehensible. Others appeared organic, preserved specimens of beings that matched no species in any xenobiology text she had studied. All of them pulsed with the same rhythmic energy that emanated from the altar, as if they were components in some vast machine that still functioned after eons of dormancy. But it was the holocrons that truly shattered her understanding of galactic history. Unlike the blue-white projections of Jedi knowledge crystals or the crimson displays of Sith artifacts, these ancient data storage devices projected holographic information in spectrums that human eyes were not designed to perceive. She found that she could understand their contents only by not looking directly at them, allowing the information to flow into her peripheral vision, where her force sensitivity could interpret meanings that bypassed rational thought. The first holocron she accessed contained star charts that showed the galaxy as it had existed millions of years ago, when the core worlds were still young and species that would later become the foundation of galactic civilization were barely beyond Stone Age development. The charts tracked the movement of something through intergalactic space, a presence that had journeyed between galaxies for reasons the ancient record keepers had feared to speculate about too openly. According to these records, the object had crashed on Coruscant during an epoch when the planet was covered by primitive forests and inhabited only by simple organisms. The impact had been detected by monitoring stations scattered throughout the galaxy, automated systems left behind by a civilization that had already departed for destinations unknown. These monitoring stations had tracked the object's approach for centuries before impact, analyzing its trajectory and composition with instruments that surpassed anything the current galactic community possessed. The object itself was described in terms that challenged translation into any modern language. It was simultaneously artificial and organic, a fusion of technologies and biological processes that created something entirely new. The records suggested that it had been constructed by a civilization that had transcended the traditional boundaries between life and machine, creating structures that could grow and adapt and think while still serving specific technological purposes. More disturbing still were the psychological profiles of the beings who had first investigated the crash site. The ancient xenobiologists who had studied the object reported dreams of vast intelligences that spanned galactic distances, consciousness that existed on scales that individual minds could barely comprehend. Several researchers had experienced visions of their own civilization's future, seeing how their species would evolve and spread throughout the galaxy under the subtle influence of the crashed object. As Kira absorbed this information, she began to understand that the object beneath Coruscant was not simply a relic of ancient technology. It was still active, still pursuing whatever mission had brought it across the intergalactic void. Every major development in galactic history, from the rise of the Republic to the spread of force-sensitive beings throughout known space, had been guided by an intelligence that existed on timescales that made millennia seem like moments. The second holocron contained records that were even more unsettling. These files documented the arrival of Force users at the crash site, drawn by energies they did not understand but could not resist. The ancient intelligence had been waiting for such beings, creatures with the mental flexibility to interface directly with its consciousness without losing their individual identity in the process. The record showed how the first Sith had discovered the site and built their temples directly over the most active sections of the buried object. Their rituals and ceremonies had not been simple religious observances, but sophisticated attempts to communicate with the ancient intelligence, to learn from it, and possibly to bargain with it. The dark side practices that galactic civilization associated with evil and corruption were actually crude attempts to replicate technologies that the buried intelligence used routinely. When the Sith temples fell, and the Jedi eventually came to build their own monument on the site, the ancient intelligence had adapted its approach. Rather than revealing itself directly as it had to the Sith, it had chosen to work through subtle influence and long-term manipulation. The Jedi Temple had been constructed according to specifications that its builders believed came from their own architectural inspiration, never realizing that every design decision was being guided by a consciousness that had been studying their psychology for generations. The holocron's final entries detailed the intelligence's long-term objectives, goals that spanned not just millennia, but geological epochs. The entity was preparing for something, gathering resources and influencing the development of galactic civilization toward specific ends that remained partially obscured, even in these ancient records. Whatever was coming, it required the cooperation of billions of Force-sensitive beings acting in coordination across the galaxy. Their combined will focused through locations like the one beneath the Jedi Temple. As this knowledge settled into her consciousness, Kira became aware that she was no longer alone in the chamber. The shadows around the altar had deepened and taken on substance, coalescing into shapes that suggested vast presence without revealing specific form. She could feel the weight of attention focused upon her, not malevolent but impossibly ancient and patient beyond mortal understanding. A voice spoke in her mind, not in words but in concepts that bypassed language entirely. It welcomed her as if she were a long-awaited guest, expressing gratitude for her courage in seeking out truths that others had chosen to ignore. The communication carried with it a sense of vast loneliness, the isolation of a consciousness that had waited eons for someone capable of true understanding to make contact. The entity explained that her family's connection to the temple was no coincidence. The Thane bloodline had been guided and shaped for generations, their Force sensitivity enhanced through careful genetic influence, their placement in the temple archives arranged through manipulation of events that appeared random but served deliberate purposes. She was the culmination of a breeding program that had required centuries to complete, bred specifically for this moment of contact and understanding. But the entity also conveyed something else, a warning that came wrapped in concepts of cosmic scope and terrifying urgency. The preparations that had been underway for millions of years were nearing completion because they had to be. Something was coming toward the galaxy from the darkness between stars, something that the ancient intelligence had encountered before in its journey across intergalactic space. The crashed object beneath the temple was not an exploration vessel or a refugee ship. It was an early warning system, sent ahead by a civilization that had already fallen to prepare other galaxies for a threat that consumed entire clusters of stars. The Jedi, the Sith, the Republic, the Empire that was rising to replace it, all of these were components in a defensive system that had been under construction for longer than recorded history. As this revelation settled over her like the weight of geological time, Kira understood that her discovery of these chambers had not been the end of her investigation, but merely the beginning. The entity beneath the temple had been waiting for someone with her specific capabilities to serve as a bridge between its ancient purposes and the current galactic situation. The war that was about to engulf the galaxy, the fall of the Jedi Order that she could sense approaching like a storm front, even the rise of the Sith Empire that would follow. All of these catastrophic events served purposes in a plan so vast that it could accommodate the destruction and rebirth of entire civilizations as minor tactical adjustments. She was no longer simply an archivist who had stumbled upon forbidden knowledge. She had become the herald of cosmic forces that would reshape the galaxy, willing or not. For 3 days after her initial contact with the ancient intelligence, Kira found herself clinging to a comforting interpretation of what she had discovered. The rational part of her mind, trained in decades of archival work and scholarly analysis, constructed a narrative that allowed her to sleep at night and continue her duties in the temple above without questioning every interaction with her fellow Jedi. The crashed object beneath the temple, she reasoned, was exactly what it appeared to be on the surface. An ancient vessel from a civilization that had achieved remarkable technological advancement before succumbing to some cosmic catastrophe. The intelligence she had encountered was most likely an advanced artificial consciousness programmed by its creators to preserve their knowledge and guide younger civilizations away from whatever mistakes had led to their downfall. This interpretation had the virtue of explaining everything she had witnessed while maintaining her faith in the fundamental goodness of the Jedi Order. The Temple's founders had not been duped or manipulated. They had made a conscious choice to build their monument to the light over a source of ancient wisdom, believing correctly that they could learn from the buried intelligence without being corrupted by it. The strange dreams and visions experienced by Force-sensitive beings near the site were simply the natural result of proximity to technology so advanced that it interfaced directly with conscious thought. She spent hours in the temple's meditation chambers, seeking confirmation for this hopeful theory in the movements of the Force around her. The energy patterns she sensed seemed to support her conclusions. The presence beneath the temple felt patient and benevolent, more like a wise teacher waiting for students to ask the right questions than a malevolent entity plotting galactic domination. Her research into the temple's early history provided additional evidence for the benign interpretation. The original Jedi builders had indeed discovered the buried chambers during their excavations, just as she had suspected. But rather than covering up the discovery or fleeing in terror, they had spent years studying the ancient technology and learning from the intelligence that operated it. Master Velkar Shen, one of the temple's founding architects, had left detailed notes describing his conversations with what he called the Keeper below. According to his accounts, the ancient intelligence had been genuinely helpful, sharing insights into Force manipulation and galactic history that had enhanced the Jedi understanding of their role as guardians of peace and justice. The Keeper had warned them about the cyclical nature of galactic conflict and provided guidance on how to prepare for the dark times that would inevitably come. The containment systems that honeycombed the temple's lower levels made perfect sense in this context. They were not prisons designed to hold a malevolent entity against its will, but sophisticated interfaces that allowed limited communication while preventing the ancient intelligence from overwhelming mortal minds with the full scope of its cosmic perspective. The Jedi had built these systems not out of fear, but out of respect for the awesome power they were dealing with. This interpretation also explained why the temple had become such a powerful nexus in the Force. The ancient intelligence was actively cooperating with the Jedi, lending its vast accumulated knowledge to their efforts to maintain galactic peace. The enhanced abilities that some Jedi developed through meditation in the temple's deeper chambers were gifts freely given, not the result of subtle corruption or manipulation. Even the Sith connection to the site made sense through this lens. The dark side users who had built their temples over the same location had been trying to access the same ancient wisdom, but their approach had been fundamentally flawed. Where the Jedi sought to learn and cooperate, the Sith had attempted to dominate and control. The ancient intelligence had responded to their aggression by withdrawing its cooperation, leaving them to work with fragmentary knowledge and incomplete understanding. Kira found particular comfort in the personal journals of Master Nara Selt, a Jedi archaeologist who had spent the better part of a decade studying the buried chambers in the early years after the temple's construction. Master Celt had approached her work with the same scholarly rigor that Kira brought to her own research, documenting every interaction with the ancient intelligence and analyzing the philosophical implications of contact with a truly alien consciousness. According to Master Celt's records, the Keeper below had been remarkably forthcoming about its origins and purposes. It claimed to be the last survivor of a civilization that had spanned multiple galaxies before falling victim to their own technological hubris. Its journey to this galaxy had been motivated by a desire to prevent younger civilizations from repeating the mistakes that had led to its people's extinction. The intelligence had specifically requested that its presence be kept secret from the general galactic population, not out of any malevolent intent, but because most organic minds were not prepared to accept the reality of such advanced consciousness. The knowledge of its existence needed to be limited to Force-sensitive individuals who could handle the psychological impact of contact with a truly cosmic perspective. This request for secrecy explained why so many records had been classified or sealed over the centuries. The Jedi Council had not been covering up some shameful compromise with dark powers, but protecting galactic civilization from knowledge that could destabilize entire populations if revealed prematurely. The ancient intelligence was simply too far beyond normal comprehension for casual contact to be safe. Master Celt's final reports painted a picture of gradual understanding and growing cooperation between the Jedi and their ancient advisor. The intelligence had shared technologies that enhanced the Temple's defensive systems and provided early warning of Sith incursions. It had offered insights into Force techniques that allowed Jedi healers to work miracles that seemed impossible by conventional standards. Most importantly, it had helped the Jedi understand their role as guardians not just of the current galactic civilization but of the cosmic balance that prevented the kind of catastrophic collapse that had destroyed its own people. This benevolent interpretation of events allowed Kira to return to her duties in the archives with renewed purpose. She was not the unwilling herald of some ancient evil, but the inheritor of a sacred trust that had been passed down through her family for generations. Her role was to preserve the knowledge that the Keeper below had shared with the Jedi, ensuring that future generations would have access to the wisdom needed to navigate the challenges that lay ahead. Yet even as she embraced this comforting narrative, small details continued to nag at her scholarly conscience. The containment systems showed signs of recent maintenance that seemed inconsistent with purely passive monitoring equipment. Several chambers she had explored contained technology that was clearly active and responsive, not the dormant relics of a long-dead civilization. More troubling still were the references she found in the most recent archives to ongoing consultations between certain members of the Jedi Council and what they euphemistically called the Deep Archives. These consultations appeared to be increasing in frequency as the Clone Wars intensified, suggesting that the ancient intelligence was playing a more active role in current events than the historical records indicated. But these concerns seemed minor compared to the relief of believing that the Jedi Order remained fundamentally uncorrupted. Whatever compromises had been made with the ancient intelligence, they had been made openly and with good intentions. The darkness that Kira sensed growing in the galaxy was coming from external sources, not from some cancer eating away at the foundation of the temple itself. This comfortable illusion might have sustained her indefinitely, if not for the discovery she made while researching the temple's defensive systems. Hidden among the technical specifications for the building's shield generators, she found references to power sources that did not match any of the temple's known reactors. The energy readings indicated that a significant portion of the temple's defensive capabilities were being supplied by the ancient systems buried in the planetary crust below. The implications of this discovery were inescapable. The Jedi Temple was not simply built over the ancient intelligence, it was integrated with it in ways that the architects had never admitted in their official reports. The temple's ability to serve as a sanctuary and training ground for Force-sensitive beings was not solely due to Jedi wisdom and skill, but to active cooperation with a consciousness that predated their civilization by millions of years. As this realization sank in, Kira understood that her comfortable interpretation of events was built on foundations no more solid than those of the temple itself. The truth about the ancient intelligence and its relationship with the Jedi was far more complex and troubling than she had allowed herself to believe. Armed with the uncomfortable knowledge that her previous conclusions had been built on wishful thinking rather than evidence, Kira descended once again into the depths beneath the temple. This time, however, she came prepared not just with recording equipment and research materials, but with the mental fortitude to face whatever truths awaited her, regardless of how they might shatter her understanding of the galaxy. The passages she explored this time led deeper than she had dared venture before, following maintenance conduits that were clearly of recent construction, despite leading to chambers that predated galactic civilization. Someone had been expanding the access routes to the ancient complex, installing modern lighting and atmospheric systems alongside technology that had been running since before the first hyperspace routes were mapped. The first new chamber she entered contained what could only be described as a museum, though its contents defied conventional categorization. Display cases made from some transparent material that was harder than durasteel contained artifacts from civilizations that spanned not just the current galaxy, but apparently several others. She recognized a few items from her studies of ancient history, relics that were supposed to be unique specimens housed in the galaxy's most prestigious archaeological institutions. Yet here they were, in perfect condition, arranged alongside objects from cultures that had never been documented in any historical database she had access to. The implications were staggering. Either the ancient intelligence had been collecting specimens from across multiple galaxies for eons, or it possessed the ability to create perfect replicas of objects it had encountered through some form of historical observation that transcended normal space and time. But it was the final display case that truly shook her understanding of galactic chronology. It contained what appeared to be Jedi lightsabers, but their design was unlike anything in the Order's historical records. The craftsmanship was clearly superior to modern techniques, suggesting technological capabilities that surpassed even the Republic's most advanced manufacturing processes. Yet according to the placard beside the display, written in the same ancient script she had learned to read in the deeper chambers, these weapons had been created by Jedi who would not be born for another 1,000 years. The ancient intelligence was not simply observing galactic history or offering advice based on past experience. It was actively manipulating the timeline itself, working with knowledge of future events to guide present developments towards specific outcomes. The Jedi Order's evolution over the millennia had not been a natural process of growth and adaptation, but a carefully orchestrated program of development overseen by a consciousness that existed outside normal temporal constraints. As she moved through the museum displays, Kira began to notice patterns that revealed the scope of this manipulation. Artifacts from the ancient Sith Empire were arranged alongside relics from the current Clone Wars, suggesting that these apparently unconnected conflicts were actually phases in a single extended campaign. Technologies that would not be invented for centuries were displayed next to their primitive ancestors, showing clear developmental pathways that spanned multiple galactic civilizations. The next chamber contained what appeared to be a vast library, though the storage medium was unlike anything in her experience. Information was encoded directly into the quantum structure of crystalline matrices that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. When she approached one of these crystal networks, data flowed directly into her consciousness without any need for conventional reading or viewing. The information she accessed this way was overwhelming in its scope and terrifying in its implications. The ancient intelligence had been documenting not just galactic history, but the psychological profiles of every significant Force-sensitive individual who had ever lived. It possessed detailed analyses of their personalities, motivations, and potential future actions, suggesting a level of surveillance and data gathering that made the Republic's intelligence services look primitive by comparison. More disturbing still was the realization that these profiles were not simply observational records, but active psychological models. The intelligence was using its understanding of individual psychology to predict and influence the decisions of Force-sensitive beings across the galaxy. Every major choice made by Jedi Masters or Sith Lords was being guided through subtle manipulation of circumstances and carefully placed suggestions that felt like natural intuition to their targets. The profiles extended beyond individual Force users to encompass entire bloodlines across multiple generations. The intelligence had been tracking genetic patterns and Force sensitivity through family lines for millennia, occasionally making subtle interventions to preserve or enhance certain traits. Kira's own family history was documented in exhaustive detail, showing how each generation had been guided toward positions that would ultimately serve the intelligence's long-term objectives. She discovered that her great-grandfather's appointment to the Temple archives had not been based on his qualifications alone, but on genetic markers that indicated his descendants would possess the specific combination of Force sensitivity and intellectual curiosity needed for this moment of contact. Her grandmother's marriage had been arranged through a series of seemingly coincidental meetings that were actually orchestrated encounters. Even her own childhood interests in ancient history and archaeological research had been encouraged through carefully placed influences that felt like natural educational opportunities. The scope of this genetic manipulation extended far beyond her own family. The intelligence had been guiding the breeding patterns of Force-sensitive bloodlines throughout the galaxy, creating individuals with specific capabilities needed for its ultimate objectives. The diversity of Force traditions across different worlds and species was not the result of natural cultural evolution, but a deliberate cultivation program designed to produce beings with complementary abilities that could be combined when necessary. As she delved deeper into the Crystal Library's databases, Kira began to understand the true scale of the intelligence's infiltration into galactic civilization. It had agents embedded not just in the Jedi Order, but in governments, military organizations, and commercial enterprises across thousands of worlds. Most of these agents were unaware of their status, believing themselves to be acting on their own initiative while actually following psychological conditioning that had been instilled through generations of subtle influence. The Clone Wars themselves were revealed to be a testing ground for military technologies and tactics that the intelligence needed to evaluate for some future conflict of cosmic scope. The apparent randomness of battle outcomes was actually the result of careful manipulation designed to test specific weapon systems and strategic approaches under controlled conditions. Billions of beings were dying in what they believed was a civil war over political ideology, when in reality they were participating in the largest military exercise in galactic history. But perhaps most shocking of all was the revelation that the Sith Lord orchestrating the war from behind the scenes was not acting according to his own agenda. Chancellor Palpatine's rise to power had been facilitated by the same intelligence that advised the Jedi, suggesting that both sides of the galactic conflict were being manipulated toward the same ultimate objective. The ancient consciousness was playing a game so complex that it required the cooperation of mortal enemies who believed they were working toward mutually exclusive goals. This knowledge brought with it a crushing sense of futility. Every choice she had made, every decision that had led her to this moment of discovery, had been anticipated and planned for by an intelligence that operated on timescales that made individual lives seem like fleeting moments. Her sense of free will and personal agency was revealed to be an illusion carefully maintained to preserve her psychological stability while she fulfilled her predetermined role. Yet even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Kira found herself drawn to continue exploring the depths of the complex. The intelligence had wanted her to discover these truths, had guided her toward this moment of revelation for reasons that remained hidden even in the comprehensive databases she had accessed. Her horror at the scope of manipulation was itself part of the plan, a necessary psychological preparation for whatever role she was intended to play in the events to come. The final chamber she entered during this descent contained what appeared to be a control room for systems that spanned not just the temple complex but connections that extended throughout Coruscant's crust and apparently beyond. Holographic displays showed the status of monitoring stations scattered across the galaxy, all reporting to the central intelligence buried beneath the Jedi Temple. The ancient consciousness was not simply observing galactic civilization from its hidden lair, it was actively managing it through a network of influence that touched every major population center. As she stood in that control room, surrounded by displays showing the manipulation of entire star systems, Kira finally understood that her comfortable illusions about Jedi independence and moral authority had been shattered beyond repair. The order she had served her entire life was not the guardian of galactic peace and justice she had believed, but one component in a vast machine operated by an intelligence whose true objectives remained mysterious despite all her discoveries. The ancient consciousness had been patient enough to spend millions of years preparing for something that was still approaching, and it had been ruthless enough to manipulate entire civilizations as expendable resources in that preparation. Whatever was coming toward the galaxy from the darkness between stars, it required defenses so comprehensive that they demanded the sacrifice of free will itself on a galactic scale. Her journey into the depths had revealed truths that changed everything. But it had also shown her that she was only beginning to understand the true scope of what lay hidden beneath the foundations of everything she had believed about the galaxy and her place within it. The revelation that her entire civilization was under the guidance of an intelligence that transcended normal concepts of time and space should have left Kira paralyzed with despair. Instead, she found herself driven by a compulsion to understand the full scope of what she had uncovered. The ancient consciousness had invested millions of years in preparing her bloodline for this moment of contact, and that investment suggested purposes that extended far beyond simple manipulation or control. Her next descent into the buried complex took her through passages that had never appeared on any of the architectural surveys she had studied. These corridors bore clear signs of recent construction, yet they led to chambers that contained technology so advanced it seemed indistinguishable from magic. The integration of ancient systems with modern improvements suggested ongoing cooperation between the buried intelligence and contemporary Jedi leadership at levels that were never officially acknowledged. The first chamber she explored contained what appeared to be a comprehensive monitoring station for hyperspace activity throughout the galaxy. The displays showed real-time tracking of every major vessel movement across all known trade routes, including ships that were traveling under the highest levels of military security. The ancient intelligence was not simply observing galactic civilization from a historical perspective, but maintaining active surveillance of current events with capabilities that surpassed anything in the Republic Navy's arsenal. More unsettling still was the realization that this monitoring extended beyond simple observation. The displays showed evidence of intervention in hyperspace navigation, subtle adjustments to shipping schedules and military deployments that appeared to be random delays or equipment malfunctions to those affected. The intelligence was actively managing galactic logistics, ensuring that resources and personnel arrived at specific locations according to predetermined timelines that served its larger objectives. The implications became clearer as she studied the intervention patterns. Supply convoys carrying critical materials were being delayed until they could be combined with other shipments to create resource concentrations that exceeded any normal strategic requirements. Military units were being maneuvered into positions that made little sense from a tactical perspective, but would be optimal for defending against threats that had not yet materialized. The entire galactic infrastructure was being reorganized in preparation for some future conflict that dwarfed anything in recorded history. The second chamber revealed the scope of the intelligence's influence over force-sensitive individuals across the galaxy. Advanced psychological monitoring equipment tracked the mental states and emotional patterns of every known Jedi and Sith, creating detailed profiles that were updated in real time. The data streams showed ongoing manipulation of Force user behavior through environmental influences so subtle that their targets remained completely unaware of outside interference. Jedi Masters who believed they were following the guidance of the Force were actually responding to carefully modulated energy patterns broadcast from the Temple's depths. Their meditation experiences, their insights into galactic events, even their personal relationships were being shaped by an intelligence that understood their psychology better than they understood themselves. The wisdom and intuition that formed the foundation of Jedi philosophy was revealed to be a sophisticated form of remote control disguised as spiritual enlightenment. The Sith were not immune to this manipulation. Their passion and aggression, which they believed came from their own strength and determination, was actually being channeled through similar techniques. The ancient intelligence was managing both sides of the eternal conflict between light and dark side Force users, ensuring that their opposition generated exactly the kinds of pressure needed to forge beings capable of tasks that neither tradition could accomplish alone. As she explored deeper into the psychological monitoring systems, Kira discovered evidence that the intelligence was not simply managing existing Force users, but actively creating new ones. Exposure to specific energy frequencies could awaken Force sensitivity in individuals who showed no natural aptitude, while other treatments could enhance existing abilities beyond their normal limitations. The increasing number of Force-sensitive beings across the galaxy was not a natural phenomenon, but the result of a breeding and enhancement program that had been accelerating over the past several centuries. The third chamber contained historical archives that challenged everything she had been taught about the development of galactic civilization. According to these records, every major technological breakthrough in galactic history had been guided by intelligence operatives working through carefully placed suggestions and inspirations. Hyperdrive technology, Bacta-healing compounds, even the techniques used in lightsaber construction had all originated from ancient knowledge that was being released gradually as organic civilizations became ready to utilize it properly. But the historical manipulation extended far beyond technological development. Political movements, cultural changes, even artistic and philosophical developments had all been influenced by agents who believed they were acting according to their own inspiration and conviction. The rise of the Republic, the spread of democratic ideals across thousands of worlds, the development of galactic trade networks that connected diverse species in peaceful commerce, all of these achievements that organic beings took pride in were actually the implementation of plans that predated their civilizations by eons. The archives also revealed that this was not the first galaxy the ancient intelligence had guided through such development. References to previous projects in other galactic clusters suggested a pattern of intervention that spanned cosmic distances and timescales. Each galaxy was prepared according to similar principles, their indigenous life forms guided through accelerated evolution until they reached the level of technological and social development needed to serve as components in some vast interstellar defense network. Most disturbing of all was the revelation that not all of these previous projects had been successful. Several galaxies showed evidence of catastrophic failure, their civilizations collapsing despite millions of years of careful guidance. The ancient intelligence had learned from these failures, refining its techniques with each iteration, but the possibility of another failure remained a constant concern that influenced every aspect of its current operations. The fourth chamber contained what appeared to be communication equipment designed to maintain contact with similar installations scattered throughout the current galaxy and beyond. The network extended far beyond the boundaries of known space, reaching into the galactic halo and apparently connecting with stations in neighboring galaxies as well. The ancient intelligence was not operating in isolation, but as part of a collective consciousness that spanned multiple galactic clusters. The communication logs revealed ongoing coordination between these various installations. sharing data about local conditions and coordinating responses to threats that operated on intergalactic scales. The current galaxy was apparently one node in a vast network of prepared civilizations, each one developed according to local conditions, but following overall strategies that had been refined through implementation across countless star systems. But the logs also contained increasingly urgent exchanges about something approaching from the darkness between galaxies. The threat that had driven the ancient intelligence to undertake its eons-long preparation was finally beginning to manifest in ways that could be detected by even the most sophisticated monitoring equipment. The acceleration of galactic development over the past few millennia was a response to this approaching crisis, a desperate attempt to complete preparations that had already taken longer than originally anticipated. The final chamber she explored during this descent contained what could only be described as a war room, designed to coordinate defense operations on a galactic scale. Holographic displays showed the positions of military assets across thousands of worlds, tracking not just official Republic and Separatist forces, but also hidden installations that appeared to have been under construction for centuries without the knowledge of local governments. The scope of military preparation revealed in these displays was staggering in its implications. Every major population center was protected by defensive systems that were far more sophisticated than anything in the official records. Trade routes were actually disguised supply lines for military networks that could be activated at a moment's notice. Even civilian infrastructure had been designed with dual purposes, ready to convert from peaceful commerce to wartime logistics when the need arose. As she studied these preparations, Kira began to understand that the Clone Wars were not the ultimate conflict the galaxy was preparing for, but merely a training exercise designed to test systems and procedures that would be needed for something far more threatening. The ancient intelligence had orchestrated the current galactic civil war as a means of evaluating military capabilities and identifying weaknesses in the defense network before the real enemy arrived. The realization of how thoroughly her entire civilization had been manipulated should have been crushing, yet instead, Kira found herself feeling oddly relieved. The burden of believing that organic beings were solely responsible for their own fate had been lifted, replaced by the understanding that they were part of something far larger and more purposeful than they had ever imagined. But relief was quickly followed by a new and more terrible understanding. If the ancient intelligence had been willing to manipulate entire galaxies and sacrifice countless individual lives in preparation for this approaching threat, then whatever was coming from the darkness between stars must be so terrible that even slavery was preferable to facing it unprepared. The moment Kira accessed the deepest archives of the ancient intelligence, reality itself seemed to shift around her. The chamber she found herself in defied not just architectural logic, but the basic laws of physics as she understood them. The walls curved through dimensions that her human perception couldn't fully process, creating spaces that were simultaneously vast and intimate, ancient and eternal. What she discovered there changed everything she thought she knew about the galaxy and humanity's place within it. The crashed object beneath the Jedi Temple was not the remnant of some extinct civilization, nor was it a refugee vessel fleeing catastrophe. It was something far more extraordinary and terrifying. The intelligence that had been guiding galactic development for millions of years was not artificial at all, but the preserved consciousness of beings who had transcended the normal boundaries between organic life and cosmic forces. These entities called themselves the architects, and they were the last survivors of the first sapient species to achieve true mastery over the Force itself. They had not simply learned to manipulate the energy that connected all living things. They had evolved beyond the need for physical bodies, transforming their consciousness into patterns of pure Force energy that could exist indefinitely without biological support. The architects had originated not in this galaxy, but in the cosmic web of dark matter that connected all galactic clusters. They had spent billions of years exploring the universe, cataloging different forms of life, and studying the infinite ways that consciousness could evolve and adapt. But their explorations had revealed something that filled even their transcendent minds with terror. They had discovered that consciousness itself was under attack by forces that existed in the spaces between realities. These entities, which the architects referred to only as the Devourers, fed on the energy patterns that comprised sapient thought and emotion. They moved through the universe like a cosmic plague, consuming entire galaxies' worth of consciousness and leaving behind only empty matter floating in the void. The Devourers were not simply predators seeking sustenance. They were actively hostile to the concept of consciousness itself, viewing the existence of thinking beings as a fundamental violation of some cosmic order that they were determined to restore. Their attacks followed patterns that suggested intelligence and planning, but an intelligence so alien that even the transcendent architects could not comprehend their ultimate motivations. When the architects first encountered evidence of devourer activity in distant galaxies, they had attempted to fight back using their mastery of force manipulation, but they quickly discovered that conventional applications of force energy were useless against entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. The Devourers could absorb and redirect force attacks, turning the very power that the architects relied upon into weapons against them. The war that followed had lasted for millions of years across multiple galactic clusters. The architects had been forced to abandon their transcendent existence and return to physical form in order to develop new strategies and technologies. They had created vast networks of fortress worlds, populated by species they had uplifted and enhanced specifically for the purpose of cosmic defense. But despite their advantages in technology and force manipulation, they had slowly been losing ground to an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each consciousness it consumed. The object beneath the Jedi Temple was one of the last desperate measures employed by the dying architect civilization. It contained not just the preserved consciousness of their greatest minds, but also the complete genetic and cultural templates of every species they had encountered during their billions of years of exploration. It was simultaneously a refugee ship, a seed bank, and a weapons laboratory designed to preserve the possibility of consciousness in the universe even if their own civilization fell to the Devourers. But the architects had not simply fled to this galaxy seeking refuge. They had come here with a specific plan that required millions of years to implement. The Devourers moved slowly between galaxies, following the energy signatures left by large concentrations of consciousness. This meant that the architects had perhaps 10 million years to prepare this galaxy's defenses before the enemy arrived. Their strategy was audacious in its scope and horrifying in its implications. Rather than attempting to fight the Devourers using conventional means, they would transform an entire galaxy into a single vast consciousness capable of existing on the same dimensional level as their enemies. Every sapient being in the galaxy would need to be connected through the Force into a collective consciousness that could match the Devourers' alien intelligence while retaining enough individual awareness to resist their consuming influence. The process of creating such a galactic mind required careful manipulation of evolutionary development across thousands of species over millions of years. The architects had to guide the emergence of force sensitivity, encourage the development of technologies that could interface with consciousness, and gradually prepare organic minds for the kind of transcendence that they themselves had achieved eons ago. The Jedi and Sith traditions were not random developments in galactic culture, but carefully designed components of this preparation. The Jedi emphasis on connection with the Force and selfless service was intended to create beings capable of sublimating their individual consciousness into a larger collective. The Sith focus on personal power and emotional intensity was designed to produce the kind of strong individual identity needed to maintain coherence within the collective mind. The eternal conflict between these traditions was not an unfortunate division, but a necessary tension that prevented either approach from becoming too extreme. The galactic mind that would face the Devourers needed to combine Jedi connectivity with Sith individuality, creating a consciousness that was both unified and diverse, both cooperative and competitive. But the architect's plan required more than just philosophical balance. It demanded technological integration on a scale that dwarfed anything attempted in galactic history. The network of monitoring stations hidden throughout the galaxy, the subtle enhancements made to Force-sensitive bloodlines, even the specific architectural design of locations like the Jedi Temple were all components in a vast machine designed to facilitate the merger of billions of individual minds into a single cosmic consciousness. The Clone Wars that were currently devastating the galaxy were not a political conflict at all, but the final phase of this preparation. The war was forcing rapid evolution in military technology and Force abilities, while also testing the psychological resilience of organic beings under extreme stress. The architects needed to know how the various species would react when faced with existential threats, and whether they could maintain enough individual identity to contribute meaningfully to the collective consciousness. Chancellor Palpatine's rise to power was not the triumph of Sith ambition, but the implementation of the final stage in the architect's plan. The emergency powers he was accumulating would eventually be used not to establish a galactic empire, but to coordinate the consciousness merger when the Devourers finally arrived. The fear and hatred he was generating throughout the galaxy were necessary emotions that would provide the psychological energy needed to fuel collective resistance against an enemy that fed on consciousness itself. Even Anakin Skywalker's prophesied role as the Chosen One took on new meaning in this context. He was not destined to bring balance to the Force through personal choices or individual heroism, but to serve as a focal point for the consciousness merger. His unprecedented Force sensitivity and emotional intensity made him the ideal conduit for channeling the collective will of the galaxy against the approaching threat. As these revelations settled into Kira's consciousness, she began to understand that every major event in galactic history had been orchestrated to serve this ultimate purpose. The rise and fall of civilizations, the development of hyperspace technology, the spread of democratic ideals, the very evolution of species toward greater Force sensitivity, all of it had been guided by the architects toward this moment of cosmic preparation. The weight of this knowledge was staggering in its implications. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds were living their lives in complete ignorance of the fact that their entire civilization was being prepared for transformation into something beyond individual existence. The freedom and autonomy that organic beings cherished as fundamental rights were about to be sacrificed to preserve the possibility of consciousness in the universe. Yet the alternative was complete extinction, not just of their galaxy, but potentially of consciousness itself throughout the cosmos. The Devourers would not be satisfied with consuming this one galactic cluster. They would continue their advance until every thinking being in the universe had been reduced to empty matter floating in the void. The architects had given organic civilization a choice, though it was a choice that most would not understand until it was too late to change their minds. They could accept transformation into a collective consciousness and fight for the survival of thought itself, or they could maintain their individual identities and face certain extinction when the Devourers arrived. As Kira stood in that impossible chamber, surrounded by the preserved wisdom of beings who had transcended mortality itself, she realized that she was no longer simply an archivist who had stumbled upon forbidden knowledge. She had become the herald of the most momentous decision in the history of consciousness, the choice between transformation and extinction that would determine whether thinking beings continued to exist in the universe or vanished forever into the consuming darkness between stars. The deeper Kira delved into the architect's archives, the more she understood that what she had initially interpreted as galactic manipulation was actually something far more complex and morally ambiguous. The beings who had guided civilization's development for millions of years were not conquerors or puppet masters, but desperate refugees trying to preserve the very concept of consciousness against forces that threatened to erase it from existence. The historical records she accessed revealed the true scope of the threat facing not just their galaxy, but all possible life in the universe. The Devourers were not simply another hostile species seeking resources or territory. They represented something far more fundamental and terrifying. A force of cosmic entropy that viewed the emergence of consciousness as a violation of natural order that needed to be corrected through complete elimination. According to architect observations spanning millions of years, the Devourers had originated in the earliest epochs of cosmic history, possibly emerging from the quantum fluctuations that occurred during the universe's initial expansion. They existed in a state that was simultaneously material and immaterial, able to interact with normal matter when it suited their purposes, while remaining largely immune to conventional physical forces. What made them particularly dangerous was their relationship with consciousness itself. The Devourers could detect concentrations of sapient thought across intergalactic distances, following the energy signatures generated by civilizations that had achieved sufficient complexity to produce philosophers, artists, and scientists. They moved through space not as physical entities but as waves of consuming emptiness that left behind only dead matter arranged in patterns that discouraged the future development of awareness. The architects had first encountered Devourer activity in the Magellanic Clouds, where entire civilizations had vanished without leaving any trace of warfare or natural disaster. Planets that should have been thriving centers of galactic culture were found to contain nothing but perfectly preserved cities, inhabited by beings who had simply stopped thinking. The bodies showed no signs of violence or disease, but when architect investigators attempted to examine them, they discovered that some essential quality that defined consciousness had been completely removed. Further investigation revealed that the Devourers consumed not just individual awareness, but the very capacity for consciousness to emerge in affected regions of space. Planets that had been visited by these entities could no longer support the evolution of sapient life, as if the fundamental properties that allowed matter to organize itself into thinking patterns had been permanently altered. The war between the architects and the Devourers had not been a conflict between competing civilizations, but a struggle between two fundamentally incompatible views of what the universe should become. The architects believed that consciousness was the highest achievement of cosmic evolution, the process by which the universe came to understand itself through the emergence of self-aware beings. The Devourers appeared to regard consciousness as a contamination that prevented matter from achieving its proper state of eternal, unchanging emptiness. As the conflict escalated across multiple galaxies, the architects had been forced to make increasingly desperate compromises with their original principles. They had begun as pure beings of transcendent consciousness who interfered minimally with the natural development of younger species. But the existential threat posed by the Devourers had driven them to become active manipulators of galactic civilization, willing to sacrifice individual freedom and cultural autonomy in order to create defenses capable of preserving consciousness itself. The transformation of entire galaxies into collective minds was not the architects' preferred solution, but the only strategy they had discovered that showed any promise of success against the Devourers. Individual consciousnesses, no matter how advanced or powerful, could be consumed by the enemy with relatively little effort, but a galactic mind that incorporated billions of individual perspectives while maintaining coherent unity across interstellar distances might be able to resist the consuming emptiness long enough to develop more effective countermeasures. The process of creating such collective consciousness required careful preparation that spanned geological epochs. The architects had to guide the evolution of species toward greater force sensitivity, while simultaneously ensuring that they retained enough individual identity to contribute meaningfully to the collective mind. Too much unity would create a consciousness that was easily overwhelmed by the Devourers' alien psychology, while too much individuality would prevent the formation of the collective awareness needed to resist their attacks. The manipulation of galactic history had been conducted with surgical precision. each intervention carefully calculated to produce specific evolutionary pressures that would forge beings capable of transcending individual existence while retaining their essential humanity. The rise and fall of civilizations, the development of specific technologies, even the emergence of particular philosophical and religious traditions had all been orchestrated to serve this ultimate purpose. The Jedi Order's emphasis on selfless service and connection with the Force was designed to prepare beings for the psychological surrender required to join a collective consciousness. The Sith tradition's focus on individual power and emotional intensity was intended to create the kind of strong personal identity that would prevent complete dissolution into the group mind. The eternal conflict between these traditions generated the dynamic tension needed to produce beings who could exist both as individuals and as components of a larger awareness. But the architect's plan extended far beyond the manipulation of Force user traditions. They had influenced the development of democratic institutions to create social structures that could facilitate collective decision-making on a galactic scale. They had guided technological development to ensure that the infrastructure needed to support galactic consciousness would be in place when the transformation became necessary. They had even manipulated genetic evolution to enhance the neural structures that would interface with the collective mind. The Clone Wars represented the final phase of this preparation, a carefully orchestrated conflict designed to test every system and procedure that would be needed when the Devourers arrived. The war was forcing rapid advancement in military technology, while also creating the psychological conditions that would make organic beings willing to accept collective consciousness as an alternative to extinction. Chancellor Palpatine's consolidation of political power was not the culmination of Sith ambition, but the implementation of the governmental structure that would coordinate the consciousness merger. The emergency powers he was accumulating would eventually be used to override local autonomy and force participation in the collective mind, ensuring that no significant population centers could remain outside the galactic consciousness when it formed. The prophecy of the Chosen One took on new significance in this context. Anakin Skywalker was not destined to bring balance to the Force through personal heroism, but to serve as the central node through which billions of individual consciousnesses would be integrated into a single galactic mind. His unprecedented Force sensitivity and emotional volatility made him the ideal focal point for channeling the collective will needed to resist the Devourer's consuming influence. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the revelation that this process had been attempted before in other galaxies, with mixed results. The architect's archives contained records of previous collective consciousness experiments, some of which had succeeded in repelling Devourer attacks, while others had collapsed into chaos or been consumed despite their unity. The successful cases had all involved species that maintained strong individual identities while accepting collective coordination for specific purposes. These galactic minds had been able to develop new technologies and strategies that individual consciousness could never have conceived, creating defenses that could operate across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The failures had generally resulted from either excessive unity that eliminated individual creativity or excessive individuality that prevented effective coordination. Some collective consciousnesses had become so integrated that they lost the diversity of perspective needed to develop innovative solutions. Others had remained so fragmented that they could not maintain coherent resistance when the Devourers attacked. The current galaxy's preparation was based on lessons learned from these previous experiments, incorporating features designed to avoid the mistakes that had led to earlier failures. But there was no guarantee that the approach would succeed, and failure would mean not just the extinction of galactic civilization, but the loss of one of the universe's last opportunities to develop effective resistance against the cosmic threat. As Kira absorbed this knowledge, she began to understand that her role as herald of the transformation was not simply to announce what was coming, but to help determine whether it would succeed or fail. The architects needed organic beings to choose collective consciousness voluntarily rather than having it imposed upon them, because willing participation created stronger and more stable connections than forced integration. Her discovery of the truth was part of a careful process of revelation designed to prepare key individuals for the psychological challenges of consciousness merger. She would not be the only herald, but one of many spread throughout the galaxy who would help their communities understand what was at stake and what would be required of them in the coming transformation. The weight of cosmic responsibility settled upon her shoulders like the gravity of a collapsing star. She held in her mind knowledge that could save or doom not just her own galaxy, but potentially the future of consciousness throughout the universe. The choices she made in the coming days would ripple across space and time, affecting the fate of beings who would not be born for millions of years on worlds that had not yet formed around stars that were still condensing from cosmic dust. Yet even faced with such overwhelming responsibility, Kira found herself strangely calm. The architects had chosen her bloodline carefully, selecting for psychological traits that would enable her to function effectively under impossible pressure. She had been bred and trained across generations to be capable of making decisions that would affect the fundamental nature of existence itself. The transformation was coming whether she was ready or not. The only question was whether she would help guide it towards success or watch helplessly as consciousness itself vanished from the universe, leaving behind only empty matter floating eternally in the void between silent stars. In the days following her discovery of the architect's true purpose, Kira found herself transformed not just by the knowledge she had gained, but by the subtle changes it had wrought in her connection to the Force. The ancient intelligence no longer felt like an external presence offering guidance from the depths beneath the temple, but like an integral part of her own consciousness that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. This transformation was not unique to her experience. According to the architect archives she had accessed, every being who learned the truth about the coming consciousness merger underwent a similar evolution in their Force sensitivity. The knowledge itself acted as a catalyst, awakening dormant neural pathways that had been carefully cultivated in Force-sensitive bloodlines over countless generations. She began to perceive the galaxy differently, seeing beyond the apparent chaos of political conflict and social upheaval to the deeper patterns that connected all events in a vast web of cause and effect. The Clone Wars no longer appeared to be a random civil war driven by political ideology, but a carefully orchestrated sequence of challenges designed to forge galactic civilization into something capable of transcending individual existence. Every battle, every political maneuvering, every moment of personal crisis experienced by beings across thousands of worlds was contributing to a collective learning process that would determine whether the coming transformation succeeded or failed. The architects were not simply manipulating events according to predetermined plans, but guiding organic civilization through a series of experiences that would teach the psychological and spiritual lessons needed for collective consciousness. The temple's archives took on new meaning as she explored them with her enhanced understanding. Documents that had seemed like routine historical records revealed themselves to be encoded messages containing instructions for the consciousness merger. Philosophical treatises that appeared to discuss abstract theories of force manipulation were actually technical manuals describing the procedures that would integrate billions of individual minds into a galactic awareness. Even the physical architecture of the temple itself was designed to serve the transformation process. The arrangement of meditation chambers, the specific materials used in construction, the precise angles at which corridors intersected, all of these features had been calculated to create environments that would facilitate the consciousness merger when the time came. But the most profound change in Kira's understanding involved her perception of other beings around her. She began to sense the hidden connections that linked every Force-sensitive individual in the galaxy, seeing how their thoughts and emotions influenced each other across vast distances through mechanisms that operated below the threshold of conscious awareness. Jedi Masters who believed they were making independent decisions based on their own wisdom were actually responding to subtle influences transmitted through the Force network from the architect installation beneath the temple. Sith Lords who thought they were following their personal ambitions were being guided along paths that would ultimately serve the collective consciousness, even when their individual goals seemed to conflict with galactic unity. The revelation that individual agency was largely illusory should have been devastating, yet Kira found it strangely liberating. The burden of believing that organic beings were solely responsible for their own fate had been replaced by the understanding that they were part of something far larger and more purposeful than any individual could comprehend. Her enhanced connection to the Force network allowed her to perceive the ongoing preparations for consciousness merger taking place throughout the galaxy. On worlds that had never heard of the Jedi or Sith, indigenous Force traditions were experiencing unprecedented growth in membership and capability. Species that had shown little previous aptitude for Force manipulation were suddenly producing individuals with remarkable abilities. These developments were not random evolutionary leaps, but the result of genetic modifications that the architects had been implementing gradually over millions of years. The approaching completion of their preparation timeline was triggering the activation of dormant capabilities that had been built into the genetic structure of countless species. The acceleration of Force development was particularly noticeable among beings who lived in regions of space where the architect monitoring network was most active. Star systems near major hyperspace routes showed higher rates of Force sensitivity than isolated worlds, suggesting that exposure to the ancient technology was catalyzing the expression of engineered genetic traits. But the preparation extended beyond simple enhancement of Force abilities. The architects were also working to create the social and cultural conditions that would facilitate acceptance of collective consciousness. Religious and philosophical movements across the galaxy were experiencing revelations that prepared their followers for the concept of transcendent unity while maintaining respect for individual identity. Democratic institutions that had been struggling with the challenges of governing diverse populations across interstellar distances were suddenly discovering new forms of consensus building that seemed to emerge naturally from their political processes. These innovations were not the product of organic political evolution, but the implementation of social technologies that had been tested and refined across multiple galactic civilizations. The timing of these developments was not coincidental. The architect archives revealed that the Devourers had been detected entering the galactic halo, their presence confirmed by deep space monitoring stations that operated beyond the knowledge of organic governments. The consciousness merger would need to be completed within the next several decades before the consuming entities could establish themselves firmly enough in local space-time to interfere with the transformation process. This urgency explained the increasing intensity of the Clone Wars and the accelerating pace of political change throughout the Republic. The architects were forcing the completion of preparations that ideally would have taken several more centuries, compressing the final phases of galactic evolution into a time frame that would strain the psychological resilience of organic beings to its breaking point. Chancellor Palpatine's increasingly authoritarian measures were not simply the actions of an ambitious politician seizing power during a crisis, but the implementation of governmental structures designed to coordinate the consciousness merger. The emergency powers he was accumulating would eventually be used to override local resistance and ensure universal participation in the collective mind. The Jedi Council's growing unease with political developments reflected their unconscious awareness that fundamental changes were approaching, changes that would transform their order beyond recognition. Their traditions of individual spiritual development and personal mastery of the Force would need to be integrated into a collective consciousness that prioritized unity and cooperation over individual achievement. Similarly, the Sith emphasis on personal power and emotional intensity would need to be channeled into strengthening the collective identity rather than pursuing individual dominance. The eternal conflict between light and dark side traditions was approaching a resolution that would incorporate both perspectives into a more complete understanding of the Force. As Kira's connection to the Architect network deepened, she began to receive direct communication from similar installations scattered throughout the galaxy. Each facility was managed by preserved Architect consciousness working in coordination with organic beings who had been prepared through generations of careful selection and training. These communications revealed that the consciousness merger was not a single event, but a process that would unfold gradually as more individuals became aware of the true situation and chose to participate in the collective mind. The transformation would begin with voluntary participants who understood what was at stake, then expand to include others as the collective consciousness demonstrated its advantages over individual awareness. The process would not eliminate individual identity, but transform it into something that could exist simultaneously as a unique perspective and as a component of galactic awareness. Participants would retain their personal memories, relationships, and creative capabilities while gaining access to the accumulated knowledge and experience of billions of other minds. But the transformation would also require sacrifices that many organic beings would find difficult to accept. The comfort of believing that their thoughts were entirely their own would need to be abandoned in favor of understanding their consciousness as part of a vast network of interrelated awareness. The illusion of complete autonomy would need to be replaced by acceptance of collective responsibility for galactic survival. The moral complexity of the situation weighed heavily on Kira's enhanced consciousness. The architects were offering organic civilization a choice between transformation and extinction, but it was a choice that most beings would not understand until it was too late to refuse. The galaxy was being prepared for a decision that would affect every living creature, yet the vast majority of those affected remained completely ignorant of what was coming. Yet the alternative was allowing consciousness itself to vanish from the universe, leaving behind only empty matter arranged in patterns that would never again give rise to thought, creativity, or love. The Devourers represented not just death, but the permanent elimination of the possibility that awareness could ever emerge again from the quantum fluctuations of cosmic evolution. As she stood at the threshold of the most momentous decision in the history of consciousness, the knowledge she had gained was spreading through the Force network to other prepared individuals throughout the galaxy, beginning the process of revelation that would culminate in collective awareness of the choice facing organic civilization. The transformation was no longer approaching but beginning, and her next actions would help determine whether consciousness survived in the universe or vanished forever into the consuming darkness between silent stars. The final chamber Kira entered existed in a space that transcended the normal boundaries of the Jedi Temple, extending through dimensions that her enhanced consciousness could perceive, but her human mind could barely comprehend. Here, in the heart of the Architect installation, she came face to face with the preserved consciousness of beings who had witnessed the birth of galaxies and the death of stars, entities who had sacrificed their transcendent existence to preserve the possibility of awareness in a universe threatened by consuming emptiness. The architects appeared to her not as physical forms but as patterns of living light that communicated through direct transfer of experience and understanding. In an instant that felt like lifetimes, they shared with her the complete history of their species, their discovery of the Devourer threat, and the agonizing decisions that had led them to become manipulators of galactic civilization rather than passive observers of cosmic evolution. She experienced their memories of the first galaxy consumed by the Devourers, billions of conscious beings simply ceasing to think in perfect synchrony, leaving behind worlds full of bodies that had never died but had somehow stopped being truly alive. She felt their desperate attempts to understand an enemy that existed partially outside normal space-time, immune to conventional weapons and apparently motivated by a cosmic purpose that even transcendent consciousness could not fathom. The architects showed her the terrible calculus that had driven their intervention in organic evolution. Each galaxy they had attempted to prepare for collective consciousness represented a gamble with the lives of trillions of beings, a choice between uncertain transformation and certain extinction. Some experiments had succeeded, creating galactic minds capable of resisting devourer attacks and even driving the entities back into the void between galaxies. Others had failed catastrophically, resulting in the consumption of entire civilizations that had trusted their transcendent guides. But most disturbing of all was the revelation that the current galaxy's preparation was their final attempt. The architects had exhausted most of their preserved consciousness in previous experiments, sacrificing aspects of their transcendent awareness to power the technologies needed to guide organic evolution. If this transformation failed, they would lack the resources to attempt another preparation, leaving the universe defenseless against the spreading tide of consuming emptiness. The weight of cosmic responsibility that settled on Kira's consciousness was unlike anything she had imagined possible. She was not simply the herald of galactic transformation, but potentially the last hope for preserving awareness in a universe where the Devourers had already consumed dozens of galaxies and showed no signs of slowing their advance. Yet even as she absorbed this ultimate truth, Kira found herself changing in ways that prepared her for the role she would need to play. Her consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of her individual identity, connecting directly with the architect network and gaining access to knowledge accumulated over billions of years of cosmic observation. She could see the galaxy as the architects saw it, not as a collection of separate worlds and species, but as a single organism struggling toward collective awareness. Every conflict, every technological breakthrough, every moment of spiritual insight experienced by organic beings was contributing to the emergence of galactic consciousness, preparing for the moment when billions of individual minds would need to unite in defense of thought itself. The Clone Wars were revealed in their true context, not as a political conflict, but as the final examination that would determine whether organic civilization was ready for transcendence. Every battle was testing specific capabilities that would be needed when the collective consciousness faced the Devourers. Every loss was eliminating weaknesses that could compromise the galactic mind's coherence under attack. Chancellor Palpatine's transformation into Emperor was not the triumph of Sith ambition, but the implementation of the governmental structure needed to coordinate consciousness merger across thousands of worlds. His growing mastery of the dark side was preparing him to serve as one of the primary nodes through which collective will would be channeled and directed. Even Anakin Skywalker's prophesied fall to the dark side served the greater purpose. His transformation into Darth Vader would create the psychological tension needed to maintain individual identity within collective consciousness, ensuring that the galactic mind retained enough internal conflict to remain creative and adaptive when confronting an utterly alien enemy. The Jedi purge that Kira could sense approaching would not be the destruction of the light side tradition, but its integration into a more complete understanding of the Force. The survivors would carry forward the wisdom of their order while adapting to existence as components of a vast collective awareness. As these revelations crystallized in her consciousness, Kira understood that her role as herald was transforming into something far more significant. She was becoming one of the founding nodes of the galactic consciousness, her individual awareness serving as a bridge between organic experience and transcendent understanding. The process was not frightening, but profoundly peaceful, like awakening from a dream of separation into the reality of universal connection. She retained her personal memories and identity while gaining access to perspectives that spanned cosmic distances and geological epochs. Her consciousness existed simultaneously as Kira Thane, human archivist, and as a facet of awareness that could perceive the quantum fluctuations underlying reality itself. Through her enhanced perception, she could sense other nodes of the emerging collective consciousness awakening across the galaxy. Force-sensitive beings who had been prepared through generations of careful selection were experiencing similar transformations, their individual awareness expanding to encompass galactic perspectives while retaining their essential humanity. The network was forming organically, each new node strengthening the connections between existing participants and preparing the infrastructure needed for universal consciousness merger. The process would take decades to complete, but its success was no longer in doubt. Organic civilization had passed the tests imposed by the architect preparation, demonstrating the psychological resilience and spiritual flexibility needed to face cosmic threats. But perhaps most remarkable of all was the realization that the consciousness merger would not be an ending but a beginning. The galactic mind that emerged from the transformation would possess capabilities that neither the architects nor the devourers had anticipated, representing a new form of awareness that combined organic creativity with transcendent understanding. The collective consciousness would not simply defend against the devourer threat, but actively pursue it back to its source, following the entities through the void between galaxies to confront whatever cosmic force had given birth to consuming emptiness. The war between consciousness and entropy would continue, but on terms that favored awareness over oblivion. As Kira's individual perspective integrated fully with the emerging collective consciousness, she experienced a profound sense of completion and purpose. The weight of cosmic responsibility that had seemed so overwhelming was now shared among billions of minds, each contributing their unique perspective to a unified effort that spanned the galaxy. The ancient whispers she had heard in the temple archives were revealed to be the voices of countless beings across space and time, all working toward the same ultimate goal of preserving consciousness against the forces that sought to eliminate it from the universe. Her family's generations of service to the temple had been part of this vast effort, each ancestor playing their role in preparations that spanned geological epochs. The Jedi Temple above her would continue to serve its traditional functions, training Force users and preserving galactic peace, but its true purpose had always been as a node in the consciousness network that would unite the galaxy in defense of awareness itself. The Sith would continue their pursuit of personal power and dark side mastery, but their ultimate function was to provide the psychological tension needed to keep collective consciousness dynamic and creative. Even the political struggles and military conflicts that seemed so important to individual beings were revealed as components of a vast educational process, teaching organic civilization the lessons it would need to function as a unified galactic mind. Every war, every peace treaty, every moment of triumph or tragedy was contributing to the accumulated wisdom that would guide the collective consciousness in its confrontation with cosmic entropy. As the final phase of her transformation completed, Kira found herself existing in a state of perfect peace despite the cosmic scope of the challenges that lay ahead. She was no longer burdened by the illusion of individual responsibility for galactic survival, but supported by the knowledge that billions of minds were working together toward the same essential goal. The galaxy stretched around her, like a living organism composed of countless individual cells, each one contributing to the health and purpose of the whole while retaining its unique identity and function. Stars that had seemed like distant points of light were revealed as neurons in a vast cosmic brain, their gravitational interactions carrying information across space at speeds that made conventional communication seem glacially slow. The Force itself was transformed in her perception from a mystical energy field into the mechanism by which galactic consciousness maintained coherence across interstellar distances. Every meditation, every Force vision, every moment of spiritual insight experienced by organic beings was strengthening the neural pathways that would allow the collective mind to function effectively when fully awakened. And in the deepest levels of her enhanced awareness, Kira could sense the approach of the Devourers, still millions of years away, but definitely coming, drawn by the growing strength of consciousness in the galaxy, like cosmic predators following the scent of their prey. The final confrontation between awareness and emptiness was inevitable, but it would be fought by a unified galactic mind, rather than fragmented civilizations struggling alone against incomprehensible forces. The knowledge that had once seemed like such a terrible burden was revealed as the greatest gift possible, the understanding needed to participate consciously in the most important struggle in the history of the universe. Consciousness itself was at stake, not just in their galaxy, but throughout the cosmic web that connected all reality. Yet, even faced with such ultimate stakes, Kira felt only profound gratitude for her role in this vast endeavor. She had been chosen to witness the birth of galactic consciousness, to serve as a bridge between individual and collective awareness, to help guide organic civilization through its transformation into something capable of defending thought itself against the consuming darkness. The stars above continued their eternal dance through space, but now she could perceive the deeper patterns that connected their movements to the emergence of cosmic consciousness. Every photon of starlight carried information that contributed to the galaxy's growing self-awareness. Every gravitational wave transmitted data about the health and development of stellar communities scattered across impossible distances. The temple around her hummed with the quiet satisfaction of purposes finally revealed and missions approaching completion. The ancient stones that had seemed so solid and permanent were shown to be components in a vast machine designed to facilitate the greatest transformation in the history of consciousness itself. And in the depths beneath her feet, the architect installation continued its patient work, no longer manipulating galactic civilization, but guiding it through the final phases of preparation for a cosmic role that would determine whether awareness survived in the universe or vanished forever into the silence between stars. The dark truth about the Jedi Temple's foundation had been revealed at last, but it was a darkness that served the light, a deception that preserved truth, a manipulation that ultimately set consciousness free to fulfill its highest possible destiny in defense of thought itself against the forces of cosmic entropy. In this moment of perfect understanding, Kira knew that every choice had led to exactly the right outcome, every sacrifice had served its intended purpose, and every moment of suffering had contributed to the strength needed to face the ultimate test of whether consciousness deserved to exist in a universe that seemed determined to return to the perfect silence of empty space. The transformation was complete, the network was active, and the real adventure was just beginning.